From Baghdad, the government of Iraq has set its hand to a bargain that signs away the oil of one of its frontier districts for 35 years more, the latest turn in the long carving up of that country's ground among the powers that hold it. From Tokyo, the workers of Japan have a new federation of their unions tonight, 400 delegates strong, raised up in the teeth of the police and the employers. From Hokkaido, in the same mail of wires, the volcano Tokachi has erupted, and a flood of melted snow and broken mountain has come down upon the farm villages below it. From Britain, the great strike was called off 12 days ago, but the Cold War that lay beneath it is not. The miners are locked out into the fourth week, and no peace is yet in sight. From Warsaw, the marshal who took the capital by force is offered now the presidency by law, and even some who blessed his rising are uneasy at the powers he would carry into the office. From Morocco, the chief of the RIF, who once humbled an empire, has put out feelers for a truce, and France replies that it will hear nothing short of surrender. And from the Levant, Lebanon has adopted a constitution, and a republic is proclaimed under the French mandate. And nearer the matters we have followed all month, the strikers of Passaic are summoned at last to Washington. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Monday, the 24th of May, 1926. Two reports reach us tonight from quarters of the world the great papers of London and New York seldom trouble to cover. We begin in Baghdad. The government of Iraq has affirmed and extended a concession over the oil of what are called the transferred territories, a strip of country along the Persian frontier, adding to it, in a revised form, a further 35 years. The concession runs to a British company, the Anglo-Persian, which has held oil rights in the region since before the war by way of the old Darcy grant. That is the news in its dry administrative form. A few signatures in an office in Baghdad, a line of figures, a term of years. It is also a small window onto a very large arrangement. Iraq is not an old nation, but a recent invention. 3 provinces of the broken Ottoman Empire, Mosul and Baghdad and Basra, fastened together after the war. While the Turks still held them, the powers of Europe had already drawn their pencils across the map. In the middle of the war, Britain and France divided the Arab lands between themselves in a secret understanding, the one we now know by the names of the 2 men who drew it, an Englishman and a Frenchman. And when the war was won, the division was made public and proper at a conference on the Italian Riviera, where the spoils were handed round under a new word the League of Nations had supplied. Not colonies, but mandates. France took the Levant. Britain took Mesopotamia and Palestine. The peoples who lived on the ground were not consulted, they were assigned. Beneath those provinces, and especially beneath Mosul in the north, lies one of the great untapped oil fields of the earth, and from the moment the war ended, every power understood it. When the Arabs of Mesopotamia rose against their new British masters, and they rose in great numbers 6 years ago this summer, the rising was put down in part from the air by aeroplanes of the Royal Air Force, sent over the villages of the Euphrates, a cheaper way of holding a country than by infantry, and a method Britain has used in that land ever since. On the throne, the British set a king, Faisal, lately driven by the French out of Damascus, and around the king they wrote a treaty that kept the real decisions in British hands. Then there was the question of Mosul itself. Turkey claimed the province for its own. The matter went to the League, whose council awarded Mosul to Iraq, which is to say, to the mandate, only this past December, and on the condition, among others, that the British guardianship continue for as much as a quarter century more. The final terms between London and Angora are being drawn still. The award came with undertakings of another kind as well, for the Kurds of Mosul, their language in the schools and the courts of the province, their own people among its administrators, promises set down at Geneva in the same decision that confirmed the mandate. Now to the company. The arrangement the powers built to share the spoils has a name, and the name tells the story, the Turkish Petroleum Company. It holds the concession over the Mosul and Baghdad fields, granted by the Iraqi government the year past, and its shares are held not by Iraqis, but by the British and the French. And a consortium of American oil houses is now being brought into the company besides the Standard companies of New Jersey and New York, the Gulf, the Sinclair, and others, admitted after Washington pressed London hard for what it was pleased to call the open door, meaning a door open to American oil capital. So the reckoning stands like this. A British company holds the frontier fields. An Anglo-French company, the Americans now at its door, holds the heart of the country. And the government of Iraq signs the papers. The one party to all this, whose oil it actually is, takes a royalty and a seat below the salt. This is what a mandate is, examined at the level of the ledger rather than the speech. The League of Nations granted Britain the mandate over Iraq as a sacred trust, a guardianship to lead the country toward standing on its own. What the guardianship has produced, on the evidence of the oil concessions, is a country whose chief wealth is spoken for by foreign companies for decades into the future. Tonight's bargain lays a further 35 years atop a grant already running, carrying it on near to the close of the century. The Iraqi who is a child tonight will be an old man before the frontier oil is his country's to dispose of. The powers do not call this conquest. They call it development and concession and trusteeship. The oil flows the same under any of the words. And now to Tokyo, and a report of a wholly different color. For not all the news of the working world is news of defeat. In the Japanese capital, delegates of some 25 trade unions have met in the Asakusa quarter of the city and founded a new National Federation of Labor. They call it, in their language, the All-Japan Libertarian Federation of Labor Unions. 400 delegates, better than 8,000 workers behind them, the printers of Tokyo chief among them. It stands now as the third of the great labor federations of Japan, apart from the cautious, respectable confederation that holds the larger numbers, and apart no less from the rival body that looks to Moscow for its direction. These unions, by their charter, take direction from no party at all. Japan came out of the war an industrial power in a hurry, its mills and shipyards and printing houses swollen, its cities filled with a new working class, and that class did not stay quiet. In the year the war ended, the price of rice rose past what working families could bear, and the country broke into riots that ran through scores of towns and had to be put down by soldiers. Out of those years, the unions grew, but the state grew watchful in the same measure. Only the year past, the same parliament that at last gave Japanese men the vote passed, in the other hand, a law against dangerous thoughts, a measure that makes a crime of organizing to alter the form of the state or to abolish private property, and that hangs over every meeting of every union and every society of the left. The political police are not a rumor there. They are a daily fact of a militant worker's life. And it is not so long since the state showed what it would do at the extreme. Some 15 years past, a circle of anarchists was hanged on a manufactured charge of plotting against the emperor, a warning the labor movement has not forgotten. It was in that country, under that law, that these delegates met. And the lasting thing from their founding is the charter they wrote. These Japanese workers declared that they based their movement on the class struggle, that they organize by industry and reject the rule of any central authority over them, and that they are opposed to imperialist aggression, and that they call for the international solidarity of the working class. In Baghdad, the oil of a subject people is signed over to the companies of the imperial powers. In Tokyo, the workers of one of those powers declare themselves against imperial aggression and for the solidarity of labor across every frontier. The wells of Mosul and the printers of Tokyo are nearer to one another than the map would have you think. From Japan again, and graver news by this morning's wires. On the northern island of Hokkaido, the volcano Tokachi has erupted, and the eruption did what fire does when it falls upon deep spring snow. It made a flood of it. A torrent of melted snow and ash and broken mountainside came down the valleys. The dispatches say it reached the farming villages below within the half hour, faster than any warning could travel, and buried them. The dead are counted already in the scores at Kamifurano and the settlements near it, and the count is not finished. Whole households are missing in the mud. The valleys that took the flood are among the most settled farm country on the island, and it is the planting season when the work of the year is just going into the ground. We will carry the fuller accounting as the wires bring it. Across to Britain, where the loud thing is over and the hard thing is not. 12 days ago, the general strike was called off, and the country told itself the crisis had passed. But the strike was never the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is coal, and the coal stoppage goes on. The miners locked out of the pits into a fourth week now, the wheels of the country turning slow on the fuel that is left. The dispute beneath it has not changed, and we have set it before you before, so we will not set it out again at length. The owners demand longer hours and lower wages to make British coal pay against the world's. The men will not take them, and the government, having stood off the general strike, can now turn its whole attention to the single industry it left standing alone. What is new tonight is the shape of the waiting. Mr. Baldwin's government put a sum of money on the table, a temporary subsidy to keep the pits from ruin while a settlement is sought. And that offer does not stand open forever. By its own terms, it runs out with the month. The miners' executive may meet, the dispatches say, to weigh what the Prime Minister has offered before the clock runs down. Neither side, as of tonight, has moved to break the deadlock. Strip the matter to its bones, and the question is an old one. Who shall pay for coal that cannot be dug at a profit? The owners say the miner shall pay, in his wage and his hours. The miner says he has paid enough. And the government, which would rather not say aloud that it must pay anything, watches the calendar. The general strike was the thunder. This is the long drought after it. And droughts are decided not in a day, but in who can hold out the longer. To Warsaw now, where a coup won in the street is proving harder to win in the law. 10 days ago, as we reported, Marshal Pilsudski took the Polish capital by force of arms, and the question of who held the real power was answered by the guns. The other question, by what right and under what constitution, was not answered, and it is that question Warsaw is fighting over tonight. The president who sat through the fighting has resigned, and a National Assembly is summoned for the end of the month to choose a successor. The Marshal has agreed to stand for the office himself. So far, this has the look of an orderly succession, a soldier who took power, returning it to the forms of law. But the dispatches carry a second note under the first. The Marshal's supporters are pressing in the same breath for the powers of the presidency to be enlarged, for the office he would take to be a stronger office than the one the last man held. And that is where the unease begins. Among the very liberals and socialists who looked on his rising with sympathy, or at least without grief, there is now a growing resistance to what some of them are calling a legalized autocracy, a dictatorship not seized but voted, dressed in the robes of the Constitution it would hollow out. So the real story of Poland this week is not the simple one the headlines told a fortnight ago, that Pilsudski had won. It is the harder one, whether a victory taken by force can be made lawful without burying the parliament that is asked to bless it. And from North Africa, the slow end of a war that for 5 years was the great hope of every people held under a European flag. In the mountains of the Rif, in northern Morocco, Abd-el-Krim built a republic and an army out of the Berber tribes, and with them he did what no colonial subject was supposed to be able to do. He beat a European power in the field. It was Spain he broke first, in a disaster the Spanish have not forgotten, and for a time his name traveled the whole colonial world as proof that the thing could be done. It can be undone, too, when the empires stop quarreling among themselves and combine. France and Spain together have drawn the net tight this past year, landings on the coast, columns from the south, and tribe after tribe falling away from the Rif as the cause grows hopeless. And now, by the dispatches reaching Paris and Fez, Abd-el-Krim has put out feelers through intermediaries for an end to the fighting. The answer from the French side is hardening as we speak. Not a negotiated peace, not an armistice that might leave the man his dignity and his legend, but an unconditional and personal surrender, nothing less. France means to take no settlement that could be read anywhere in its empire as a draw. The point is not only to win the war, the point is to stage the ending of it as a lesson addressed to every other subject people that might be watching to see how such a story comes out. How it comes out, we do not yet know. Tonight, the net is closing, and the terms are surrender or nothing. And from Beirut, by yesterday's dispatches, Lebanon has a constitution. The Representative Council adopted it on Sunday, and the Lebanese Republic was proclaimed the same afternoon. A parliament of 2 chambers, a president to be chosen in the days ahead, the forms of a constitutional state complete. It is the same France that holds the mandate over Syria across the mountains, and these dispatches reach us in the same week as the reports of aircraft over Damascus. In Lebanon, the mandate writes a constitution. In Syria, it writes notices of bombardment. Both are issued under the same authority, toward the same stated purpose, the leading of peoples toward governing themselves. A constitution is not a small thing, and the men who drew this one in Beirut are in earnest about the state it builds. But the power that grants a constitution keeps the power to suspend it, and the same hand that signs the one over Beirut is loosing the bombs over the Ghouta. That is the shape of a mandate in the Levant as in Mesopotamia, the local office and the external master who keeps the key to it. Home now to the United States and a quarrel that shows the great experiment of prohibition for what it has become, less a moral crusade than a tangle over who has the power to enforce it. The president has lately put forward a new plan for drying up the country, to deputize local officers, county by county, as agents of the federal government, so that the sheriff's men might enforce the national liquor law where the federal service is too thin on the ground to reach. From California comes the first sharp answer. The Attorney General of that state has questioned in public whether the plan is even lawful, whether a county deputy can be turned into a federal officer by such an arrangement, and whose authority he then answers to. It is a dry argument in the legal sense, and some would say in no other, but it shows what prohibition actually is 6 years on. It is not a settled law that the whole country obeys. It is a running battle between Washington and the states, between one office and another, over how the law is to be enforced at all. The saloon was abolished by amendment. The drinking was not, and the machinery built to stop it spends as much of its strength fighting itself as fighting the liquor. From Washington again, by Saturday's wires, a curious piece of lawmaking. The president has signed an act to create 2 great national parks in the eastern mountains, one in the Blue Ridge of Virginia, one in the Great Smoky Range along the Tennessee and Carolina line. But the act buys nothing. Congress has authorized the parks and appropriated not a dollar for their ground. The land, hundreds of thousands of acres of it, must first be bought and presented as a gift by the states and by private subscription before the government will consent to administer it. The nation will take the deed. The public must raise the price. A shorter dispatch and a grimmer one, of the kind the modern papers print so often that the eye learns to slide past it. The wires count 18 dead across the country from a single Sunday, killed in aeroplane crashes and at the crossings where the railroads cut the roads, with more hurt in the derailment of a train in the east. The aeroplane and the fast train are the prizes of the age, sold as speed and progress and the shrinking of distance. They take their steady toll in the meanwhile, a few souls every Sunday, counted in a column and turned past. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night.